So, as I said, I'm going to talk about um, the UN and the, what is this called? The Hill of Evil Council. Before I get started, just a reminder, and to those who are new, I wear this yellow star and the yellow clothing of shame as a reminder, a testimony against the Christians for what they did to the Jews and the followers of Yeshua, followers of Yehoshua, from actually, I will say from 67 AD until at least the 1940s. Especially from Constantine to the 1940s, where they, professing themselves to be righteous, carrying cross carriers, crusaders they were, and still are, raped, pillaged, and murdered the sheep of the Messiah. And their reward, their vengeance is coming upon these Christian nations. So, in my last video, I was trying to explain why the United States needs to get the UN out of the United States, because the UN is cursed. The UN violated the everlasting covenant. What do you mean violated the everlasting covenant? I want to first go to Isaiah the prophet. Verse 24, chapter 24 and verse 5. We'll start in verse 1. Behold, Jehovah makes the earth empty and makes it waste, and turns it upside down and scatters abroad the inhabitants thereof. So shall it be with the people, so with the priest, so with the servant, so with his master, as with the maid, so with the mistress, as with the buyer, so as with the seller, as with the lender, so as the borrower. So as with the taker of usury, so as to the giver of usury. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for Jehovah has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away, and the world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth do languish, and the earth is defiled under the inhabitants thereof. Why? Because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broke the everlasting covenant. For this reason has the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate, and therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. What? How did they violate the everlasting covenant? The everlasting covenant is for Israel. The everlasting covenant was to bring Israel back to all Israel back to the Holy Land, not just a few of them, but all Israel back. And if you read, you can go to Ezekiel 37, you can go to Jeremiah 32 or 33. We'll go to Jeremiah 32 in verse 40. Okay? Jeremiah 32 and verse 40. And you have to start in verse 36 as it's promised of restoration. So the promise of restoration of all Israel is the everlasting covenant. Verse 36, and now therefore, thus says Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel concerning this city, You say it shall be delivered into the hand. Why do you say it shall be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence? Behold, I will gather them out of all the nations where I've driven them in my anger and in my fury and my great wrath, and I will bring them again unto this place, and will cause them to dwell safely. And they shall be my people, I will be their Elohim, and I will give them one heart and one way, and they shall fear me forever for the good of them and of their children. Verse 40, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them, that I will not turn away from them to do them good, but I will put my fear in their hearts. This is the circumcision. This is in the future. This is actually already started. In their hearts, and they shall not depart from me. Yes, I will rejoice over them to do them good, and I will plant them in this land assuredly with my whole heart and with my whole soul. So now we see that the everlasting covenant and the bringing of all Israel back to that land are one and the same. What have the nations done? We just read. They broke the everlasting covenant. And that is the reason why men are going to be burned, why the great fire is coming, and few men left. That's the reason. Because they stood in the way of the kingdom. They stood in the way of this promise of restoration. And they even went further than that. They called Jehovah's covenant of peace with Israel a false peace. This is what they've done. For Ezekiel 37 verse 26, and you know what happens in Ezekiel 38, don't you? Ezekiel 37:26. I will make a covenant of peace with them, and it shall be an everlasting covenant unto them, and I will place them into their own land, and will multiply them, and set my sanctuary in the midst of them forevermore. Yet, so many Christians, among the Protestants especially, say this covenant of peace is a covenant of false peace. Now, the hill of evil counsel. I'm going to read. I don't understand this website. It's Luke810.com. I don't even know who's writing it. But anyway, in January 2000, issue of Israel Today, a magazine published, and what I'm not going to use the term Jesus, okay, folks? A magazine published, obviously in Israel, is a story of the hill of evil counsel. This hill is south of the old city of Jerusalem and south of the Mount of Olives. It had its name since the time of Yehoshua. Interestingly, in order to get the hill of evil counsel, to get to the hill of evil counsel from the old city, one must pass through the valley of Gehinnom, or Gehenna, or through Ekeldama. In Greek, Gehenna means hell. It was where the city's trash was thrown, where the rats and the vermin were. Fires smoldered there continually. Akeldama is the field Judas bought with the money obtained by his betrayal of Yehoshua. In the time of Yehoshua, the hill of evil counsel was where the homes of the two high priests were located. Hannas and his son-in-law Caiaphas lived there. It was Caiaphas who led the Sanhedrin where it demanded the death of Yehoshua. Prior to the time of Yehoshua, this same hill was the home of guess who? Antiochus IV. It was he who in 165 BC foreshadowed the anti-Messiah by desecrating the temple of Jehovah in Jerusalem. It is said that he sacrificed a pig on the altar of the temple, and he did. So as you see, the hill of evil counsel has great meaning. And maybe while I'm talking through this article, maybe you should listen and then Google the hill of evil counsel and who is sitting there right now. In 1920, the Hill of Evil Counsel became home to the government house, the headquarters for the British in Palestine. The British were not very supportive of the Jews. What an understatement that is. I'll tell you what the British did. While they sat in the house of evil counsel, while they sat in the house of Antiochus IV, the desolator, when the Jews tried to leave Europe and escape to the Holy Land, the British would not let them in. You see, the Balfour Declaration was a promise by the Gentiles to let the everlasting covenant we just talked about begin. But when the British refused to let the Jews enter into the Holy Land for safety, the everlasting covenant was broken. Go ahead and read Isaiah 24 and see what happens when you break the everlasting covenant. The Jews suffered at the hands of the British. Horribly they did. The Jews were not allowed to have any weapons, not even pistols or revolvers. In 1948, when Israel became a state, the British withdrew from what they called Palestine and left all of their weapons, tanks, and artillery to who? The Arabs. By the way, the land is properly known as Israel. It was Israel until the Romans deported the Jews. It says in 135 AD. Well, they began deporting them in 70 AD, but I'm not going to argue over the years here. The Romans shipped the Jews to slave markets all over the Roman Empire and then renamed the land of the children of Israel. They named the land for the enemies of the Jews the Philistines. In Latin, Philistine is Palestine. In their own language today, the Palestinians call themselves Philistines. It is interesting how traditions continue to hold true. Black or darkness traditionally indicates evil. White or light traditionally indicates good. The Hill of Evil Counsel traditionally has been the location of anti-Jehovah or anti-Israel forces. Now that you have Googled who lives in the Hill of Evil Counsel today, you should know this already. So who lives in the Hill of Evil Counsel today? The United Nations has an administrative compound on the hill. In the future, will the United Nations fill the role of an anti-Jehovah or anti-Israel oppressor? You want to know the answer? A resounding yes. And that is why, in one of my previous videos about the earthquakes, the deep earthquakes happening in the Ring of Fire, very unusual deep earthquakes, the United States needs to get the headquarters of the United Nations out of this country. The United States needs to get everything that has to do with the United Nations out of this country. The United Nations is a curse. The United Nations is the Judas Iscariot against Israel. The United Nations is the Antiochus IV of Israel, the opposer. And if you look at the founding members of the United Nations, you will see that it is predominantly Christian Europe. There are 50 member nations. You'll see it. Look it up for yourself. And speaking of the earthquakes that are happening around the Ring of Fire, and the website that I pointed out that you should go and get yourself educated on how these earthquakes develop, what do you think will happen when this major deep earthquake happens in northern Israel? Just go get you a map out and see where are the other earthquake and volcano prone regions that would be affected by this great earthquake. Apparently there is going to be an earthquake so massive on the earth that it's going to topple all the cities of this world. And I believe that earthquake, that particular earthquake, is going to be triggered by the earthquake in Israel. The Hill of Evil Counsel. Who sits there? Israel's enemy, the UN.